Live and on your side. This is KTBS 3 News Weekend.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Elsa Gillis. Thanks for joining us tonight. Fort Polk, Louisiana is a sprawling 240,000-acre Army post where wild horses have been running free for decades, but that could soon come to a halt. The Army wants them gone. It says the horse population has grown too big and is creating a safety hazard. But the Army is meeting resistance from people who say the horses have played too big a role in our nation's history to be gotten rid of. After being alerted to this story, we went to the community where the horses roam to speak with concerned citizens.
It just hurt my heart because I couldn't imagine these majestic herds of animals being rounded up, shipped out of there, and I knew that many of these horses were going to die.
Mary Bricado is with the Louisiana Horse Rescue Association. She first saw the horse population in May during a tour with a Fort Polk commander and local historian.
We were told that they were descendants of cavalry horses that had been perhaps injured or were lame or whatever during training exercises during World War II in 1941, and instead of treating the horses, they turned them loose.
A local historian who has studied Fort Polk's cavalry history writes, beginning in 1941, the U.S. Army held the largest maneuvers ever held in the history of the Army here in Louisiana. Camp Polk was built to support this large maneuver and training area. An important part of this maneuver was 2 divisions of mounted horse cavalry. He says they were eventually turned loose and over the years have run wild, along with horses that are descendants of what are called heritage families. Those are people whose lands were seized by the Army years ago and had to leave behind their animals. And these books, partly funded by the Army, describe the horses' role at Fort Polk.
They're a treasure. They're not a pest to get rid of. These horses are part of the heritage, the culture, and the history of that area, and they need to stay where they are. They're not hurting anyone.
But the Army sees it differently. We spoke by phone with Colonel Brian Sullivan, Fort Polk's Chief of Staff.
They currently present a training distraction to rotational units going through the combat training center, and they also present a safety hazard. The training distraction is real in terms of the efforts that we have to make in order to move the herd, in order to either conduct an air land or an air assault or an airborne assault into these large open areas where the herds congregate.
Now, have there been any accidents or safety issues already?
There have not, none documented.
He says there are an estimated 700 wild horses on or near Fort Polk. That number is expected to double in 10 years. I'm standing in a big open field right now where we just saw some of the wild horses run by. Now, all parties involved in this debate agree that something needs to be done about the horse population, but the disagreement comes over the solution and the origin of the problem. First disagreement, whether they are wild horses protected by federal law from branding, harassment, or death. The Army considers them trespass horses and not protected. A federal appeals court has sided with the Army. Second disagreement, where these horses come from.
There's no lineage to World War II or a connotation associated with heritage horses. Most of these horses are horses that have simply been abandoned on our training area.
There's a lot of talk about there being several dumped horses out there as well, and they probably, in all fairness, take up a small percentage of the herds. But from what I've seen from going out there and photographing the herds, and what I've interviewed and talked to other people, a majority of them are wild horses that have been there for years and years and years and years.
Teresa is a Leesville resident and animal lover who's gotten involved in this situation.
How do you know that they're not cavalry descendants or descendants of the heritage family horses?
Again, what's most important is that they've been determined, trespass horses by the court, and any protection provided by the Wild Free Roaming Horses and Buffalo Act does not apply.
So what happened to those horses?
Well, I mean, we don't know. But again, it's trespass horses.
While the Army has decided to get rid of the horses, a public comment period on how to do it ends this week. And that's where the real concern comes in.
These are wild horses. These are not horses that can be domesticated. They can't be trained. They can't be broken. They're not for pets. They're not for riding.
Mary and Teresa are concerned some of the horses could end up at slaughterhouses, something I asked Colonel Sullivan about. He says they currently give out permits for people to capture horses on the post, but there is a 4-horse per year limit, and they must sign an agreement that prohibits slaughtering the animals.
Does anyone keep track of that at Fort Polk once they're sold, though? Does anyone monitor that agreement?
We do not.
He says capture permits and attempts to sterilize the horses have not controlled the horse population. Still, Teresa says there are too many unanswered questions to come up with a solution just yet.
You can't solve a problem if the water's all muddy, if you can't see the exact problem. If you don't know how many horses there are, you don't know the heritage of the horses, you don't know the temperament of the horses.
One thing both sides agree on is the safety of soldiers. How to get there is where they differ. Advocates for the horses would like to see the abandoned ones adopted out and find a way to keep the wild horses away from training grounds. After the public comment period ends, Fort Polk officials will present the options to the commanding general. He will announce his decision in January, and it will be followed by another public input period. Several fire districts worked a major